All right, if you have your Bibles, Matthew 5. I have no idea how this just fell on the calendar that we get to talk about lust and adultery on Mother's Day. So I blame Kaylee for that, for setting the calendar schedule. Actually, it was me. It wasn't her, but she's not here, so I can blame her. So Matthew 5, 27 to 30. Matthew 5, 27 to 30. You have heard it, that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one of the parts of your body than your whole body to be thrown in hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it's better that you lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. So we're studying together what is the most celebrated and challenging body of teaching that Jesus has ever offered. And in looking at Matthew 5, 6, and 7 in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is describing and inviting us into an upside-down kingdom, explaining what it's like and what it means to live as citizens of his kingdom. And so today we come to a pretty challenging teaching that Jesus has about sexuality and adultery. Fire is amazing. It's one of the greatest tools humanity has ever discovered. It can boil water. It can bake bread. It can bring heat to a freezing home. It can gather people about on a campfire for laughter and stories and s'mores. And there's something magical about it, how a spark of fire can become a light, a warmth, and create space for life. But fire is also terrifying. It can burn down forests. It can destroy homes. It can destroy entire communities, as we've seen in California even this year. Firefighters don't exist because fire is bad. Firefighters exist because fire, when it's uncontrolled, is dangerous. And if you ever watched a small fire catch something it wasn't supposed to, you know how fast that line goes from comforting and catastrophic, how line that goes really fast. Fire is only good when it stays within the context of where it's supposed to stay. It's when fire refuses to stay in its proper boundaries that things go wrong. And if you try to tame it on your own terms, say by throwing gasoline on it, or assuming that, it won't spread that far, you're not being clever. You're like a walking insurance claim. And here's the thing. Sex is a lot like fire. It's beautiful. It's powerful. It's designed for good. In the right context, like in a covenantal marriage, it brings warmth and connection and life and even healing. But when taken out of where it's supposed to be, it burns. It destroys trust and relationships and families and even faith. It's not that sex is bad. Just like fire, it's good, but it's not something that we toy around with or treat casually. And in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus doesn't avoid the subject. He walks straight into it because he knows how much is at stake when it comes to this topic. And today we're going to lean into a hard but important teaching, one where Jesus isn't trying to shame us, but to rescue us from playing with fire in a dry field. And as we've walked through this text, a few things I want you to notice. First of all, that Jesus is not against sex. He's actually protecting its goodness. Jesus isn't against sex. He's actually protecting its goodness. Verse 27, verse 28, you've heard that it said, you shall not commit adultery, but I tell you, here's the thing. You've heard it said, but I tell you. There's one of those 6 sections in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus begins to quote a passage in the Old Testament, and then he says, here's how I want you to live. And in each case, he's showing us what God is against, the prohibition, but he's actually revealing the deeper righteousness, what God is for, the positive vision of the life that God intends. And so last week, we saw the 6th commandment, do not murder. Jesus taught us that it's not that God is only not prohibiting murdering someone, but he's actually calling us to give value and dignity to human beings. The positive version of the kingdom. It's not just that you're not negative, but you value people. You give them dignity. You treat them as the imago Dei, made in the image of God. When Jesus says, do not steal, he's not just against taking of the things of others for other people's stuff, but he's actually giving of your stuff, living with contentment and generosity so that others can be blessed through your life. That's the positive version of the kingdom of God. And so in each case, Jesus is going beyond fulfilling the law and just saying, I met the law, but he's demonstrating a new way of life that's oriented about right relationships with God, with others. And so that's what we need to keep in mind. Because as tough and severe as today's teaching is, behind it is a positive vision of the life that Jesus is calling us to live. And so you might be wondering, what is Jesus warning us against? What is he actually for? What is he affirming here? And here's where we start. Jesus is affirming the goodness of sex and sexuality. And I know you're thinking, like, really, where does it say that in the text? All I see is warnings here. Fair point. It's not explicit, but it's definitely there. What Jesus assumes. Think about it. The more precious something is, the more strongly you'll act to protect it. You don't put a plastic bag in a safe. You put a diamond ring in a safe. You put money in a safe. And Jesus' words here are incredibly serious, not because sex is bad, but because his vision of it is really, really good. Jesus was a Jewish rabbi immersed in a tradition that held a sacred, exalted view of sex. The scriptures he grew up with didn't blush about sex. They honored it. They celebrated it. They treated it like a window into the mystery of divine love. Go all the way back to the beginning in Genesis 1 and 2. God creates Adam and Eve. He gives them one another in body and soul. And when they come together in sexual union, God doesn't cover his eyes and be like, oh, where did that come from? He's not awkward. He's not scandalized. He's the one who made it. He designed it. He blessed it. He delights in it. He calls it good. In fact, the very end of the creation story is wild if you stop to think about it. A naked man sees a naked woman, bursts into spontaneous poetry, and God is right there smiling. And that's not a setup to a bad joke. This is the word of God. Creation ends with love poetry and arousal in the presence of God. That's how the Bible begins, friends. And that vision runs throughout the Old Testament. In Proverbs 5, you'll find an actual benediction over marital sex, blessing a young couple with a prayer that they would enjoy and delight in each other's bodies. The Talmud, the central Jewish text, says that on the Sabbath, sex is encouraged. Yes, on the holiest of days. And then there's Song of Solomon. Have you read that? It's not subtle. It's symbolic. And I know some theologians will say, oh, that's theological of our love for Jesus. No, it's not. It is written between a man and a woman, and it is all about sex. It is. This is the vision that Jesus inherits. This is the tradition he stands for, and a tradition that sees sex as one of the most mysterious, powerful, and sacred gifts that God has ever given us. A tradition that says your sexuality, your embodied relational image-bearing self is not something to be hidden or ashamed of, but something to be honored. And Jesus' warning makes perfect sense in that context. He's not trying to restrict something shameful. He's trying to protect something that is sacred. And it's important to pause here and name something, because this whole conversation of sex and sexuality can be confusing and even painful, especially in the church. Let's be honest, Christians have not handled this topic well. And maybe you've experienced that firsthand. Maybe you've been made to feel ashamed of your body or confused about your desires or even wounded by the way this topic was taught growing up. For many people, the stereotype is that Christians think that sex is bad and dirty, or at best, something that you kind of tolerate because you just need to reproduce kids. There's a quote from the Texas country singer Butch Hancock that captures this image perfectly. He said, "Life in Lubbock, Texas taught me that sex is the most awful, filthy thing on earth, and you should save it for someone you love." Right? It's the most awful, filthy thing on earth, and save it for someone you love. It's funny until you realize how true it feels for those of us who grew up in the church. Because that's the message a lot of us have picked up on. Sex is gross, sex is sinful, sex is shameful, but you should definitely do it after you say your vows. And sadly, the church has reinforced that confusion. We spent so much time talking about the dangers, the boundaries, the don'ts, that we forgot that it starts with yes. That we made it sound like sex is something that God just kind of tolerates instead of something that he actually delights in. But hear this clearly. The first word that Scripture says about sex is not no, it's yes. It's a resounding, joyful, embodied yes. Yes, this is good. Yes, this is sacred. Yes, this is a gift. This is not just biology or impulse. This is a reflection of the image of God, a window into his love and creativity and covenant. And so before we say anything else, before we talk about the brokenness and the boundaries and the distortion, we have to start where the Bible starts. Sex is good. Your body is good. Your sexuality is part of how you bear the image of God. That's the foundation. That's the vision that Jesus affirms. And that's the story that, friends, we ought to reclaim, one of beauty and dignity and sacred joy. And so if sex is not bad, and if Jesus is not against sex, what is he condemning in our passage? Here's what he's condemning. Jesus is actually against the distortion of sex because it diminishes human dignity. Jesus is against the distortion of sex because it diminishes human dignity. He's not down on desire. He's fiercely protecting its beauty and power because when something is sacred, you don't let it be misused without speaking up. And Jesus is speaking up with intensity. One obvious distortion of it is adultery, the literal act of breaking the covenant of marriage. It's not just moral failure, it's a deep relationship wound. Adultery devastates. It shatters marriages, it wounds children, it splits communities. Everyone knew it was wrong in Jesus' time, and we still recognize the pain and the brokenness that adultery creates today. And so when Jesus quotes the command, do not commit adultery, a lot of people probably thought, easy, I'm good. I've never crossed that line. The rabbis taught it, the people believed it, and maybe even now some of us feel the same way. I'm not even married, I'm not cheating, this doesn't apply to me. Check, done, move on. But Jesus doesn't let us off the hook that easily. He says adultery isn't just something that happens with your body. It actually starts long before that, with the eyes, the mind, the imagination. Verse 28, anyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery in his heart. And the response of saints throughout history, and probably many of us even today, is like, wait, seriously? Yes. He's being serious. Why? Because in Jesus' kingdom, the standard isn't just your behavior alone, it's your heart. It's our desires, our thoughts, our inward posture that matters. Jesus is going more than for just our actions. He's going after the roots that create our action. And this is what life in the upside-down kingdom looks like. Not just avoiding sin in public, but allowing Jesus to transform how we live from the inside out. Not just honoring the covenant with our bodies, but honoring it with our thoughts. Not just avoiding scandal, but cultivating purity and wholeness and love in our inner lives. Because the real transformation Jesus brings doesn't change just what we do, it actually changes what we want. Let's pause here for a moment because there's one of those words that we think we understand, but it's worth slowing down and asking exactly what is lust. And before we go to what is lust, let me tell you what lust isn't. Lust is not sexual desire. Young people, hear me on this. It's not sinful to have sexual desire. That desire is good. It's part of how God made you. It's wired into creation, not a glitch in the system. Desire is not something to be ashamed of. It's something to be stewarded. Lust is also not just noticing someone's beauty or feeling attracted to another person. Jesus doesn't say anyone who looked at another woman is sinful. He is something more specific. Jesus isn't asking us to become emotionally flat, sexually numb robots who walk around avoiding eye contact with people of the other sex as if we're in a middle school purity seminar. Attraction is normal. Desire is natural. Beauty is everywhere. And that's not lust. So what is lust? In the original Greek, Jesus says, anyone who goes on looking at another woman in order to desire her or want her. It's not just glance, it's gazing. It's a sustained, intentional, willful looking at with the purpose of turning that person into an object for personal gratification. I want him or her for me. Lust is not about seeing someone, it's about using someone. It's not about attraction, it's about reducing a person to a fantasy. It's not relationship, it's transactional. Lust is impersonal desire. It wants the pleasure of intimacy without the covenant of relationship. It wants the body without the soul. It wants connection without commitment. And let me say something that may sound old-fashioned, but it's still true. Sex is covenantal. It was designed to live within the fireplace of marriage, where it can burn bright without burning everything else down. Because sex in God's design is not just about erotic thrills, yes, even though that's a part of it. It's not just about making babies, yes, that's also important. Sex is a symbol, a sign, a sacred embodiment of a deeper reality. It's the physical expression of a covenant relationship where two people give themselves to one another. It's not just bodies, it's hearts, it's mind, it's soul. Just as I give my body to you, so you give your body to me. Just as I am physically vulnerable to you, I am emotionally and spiritually vulnerable as well. This is why some traditions, like our Catholic brothers and sisters, talk about sex as a sacrament, because it reflects the kind of total self-giving love that God himself offers to us. See, sex is a signpost to a greater reality, a covenant where nothing is hidden and everything is offered. And friends, lust distorts that. It separates what God has joined together. It seeks pleasure without presence, connection without cost. And friends, here's why Jesus takes it so seriously. See, when we see sex through Jesus' eyes, when we understand it as covenantal, as sacred, as deeply personal, the difference between lust and love become obviously clear. C.S. Lewis in his book, Four Loves, puts it like this. He says, we use a most fortunate idiom when we say of a lustful man prowling the streets that he wants a woman. Strictly speaking, a woman is just what he does not want. He wants a pleasure for which a woman happens to be a necessary piece of apparatus. Let that settle in for a second. Lust doesn't want her. Lust doesn't want to know him and get to know him and be in a relationship with him. It wants an experience, a hit, a thrill, a moment of escape. Lust doesn't see a person, it sees a prop. But sexual love, by contrast, desires a person. Not just any person, a particular person. Someone that you're bound to in covenant. Someone that you've promised to protect and serve, to cherish, till death do you part. Lust wants to take. Love wants to give. Lust is impersonal, driven by the pursuit of pleasure. Love is sacrificial, given by the desire to be known and to know. Lust consumes. Love communes. Lust sees flesh. Love sees a whole person. And this is why lust is so devastating. It hollows out what God made to be whole. And this distortion shows up most pervasively and most destructively through pornography. We've already talked about adultery, but in our digital age, the most common outlet for lust is through a screen. It's everywhere, it's normalized, and it's quietly eroding our capacity for covenant love. Pornography at its core is pornography takes something sacred and turns it into a product. It's not about a person, it's about parts, skin, angles, scenes, clips. It's not someone being loved, it's someone being used. More than 35% of internet traffic today is porn-related. 35%. Let that sink in. Over a third of what happens online is content specifically engineered to arouse, not in the context of love or covenant, but in isolation, for our consumption. That means we're not just surrounded by it, we're swimming in it. Our culture is saturated with sexual images and sounds and narratives designed not to connect us, but to isolate us and to distort us. And friends, let's be clear. Porn is not a private struggle. It's not just what happens behind closed doors or behind a hidden browser tab. Porn is a relational issue. Porn doesn't just affect your screen time, it affects your ability to love real people. It rewires your heart to crave novelty over intimacy, control over connection. It slowly trains you to look at others not as image bearers of God, but as instruments of pleasure. And over time, it numbs your ability to bond. It erodes trust in relationships. It makes natural, mutual, self-giving love harder to give and even harder to receive. It turns sex into a performance and people into products to be used. And even if you're not in a relationship, it affects how you prepare for one. Pornography doesn't just distort your view of sex, it distorts your expectations, your desires, even your capacity for vulnerability and real intimacy. Friends, porn is a spiritual issue. And Jesus says our hearts matter, not just our behavior. And friends, porn is a form of discipleship. It is forming you, it is shaping you, just like everything else we've already repeatedly practiced. Every click that you make, every scroll that you take, every image forms the soul in a direction, either toward love and holiness or toward selfishness and disintegration. Porn habituates our hearts in the opposite direction of Jesus. Instead of laying our lives down in love, it teaches us to take. Instead of communion, it's consumption. Instead of seeing purity, it trains our eyes to grasp for lust. And it deadens our soul to the kind of love that Jesus invites us into. A love that is whole and vulnerable and covenantal and self-giving. Porn is also a justice issue. It's a relational issue, it's a spiritual issue, it's a justice issue. Because behind every video, every image, every stream, friends, there's a person. And often that person is being trafficked, coerced, abused, or manipulated. Even in the consensual side of the industry, there are countless stories that emerge of people who enter with promises of money or fame and leave traumatized and exploited. The porn industry is built on objectifying women. It thrives on detachment. It profits from dehumanization. To participate in porn, even privately, is to participate in an industry that profits off of the pain, normalizes violence, and turns people into products. So no, it's not just a personal purity. It's about how we view others. It's about how we view ourselves. It's about the kind of world that we're hoping to create or allowing to persist. Jesus doesn't just warn us about lust and pornography to shame us. He warns us because he wants to free us. He wants to give us new eyes. He wants to restore dignity. He wants us to love deeply, not just to feel deeply. Because in his kingdom, friends, people are not objects. They're sacred. They're seen. They're worth everything, even the hard work of healing, transformation, and grace. And before we move on, one more thing I want you to notice in the teaching of Jesus here. Yes, lust affects both men and women. Women are not immune from it. And I'm speaking to everyone here. In our digital, hyper-sexualized world, this is an increasingly struggle for women as well. But it's worth noticing something very specific in this passage. This is the only time in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus explicitly addresses either sex, and he addresses men. And that's not by accident. Because what Jesus is doing here is radical, especially in his cultural context. Jesus is pushing back against the patriarchal norms of his day. Because in the ancient world, women were regulated as objects or property, tools for male pleasure and satisfaction. And sadly, today, even in many conservative religious communities, the burden for male purity is often placed on the woman. Cover up. Don't tempt your brothers. Be modest so the others don't stumble. The Pharisees took this to the extreme. They created elaborate rules about how women should dress and behave, and even where they could stand or sit. They segregated them, silenced them, excluded them, and in doing so, they made women the problem instead of helping men deal with their heart issue. And Jesus steps away from that and says, no, absolutely not. He doesn't tell men to avoid women. He doesn't tell women to disappear and stay to the side. He tells men, take responsibility for what's going on inside of your own heart. Verse 28, if anyone looks at a woman with lustful intent, he has already committed adultery with her in his heart. He's not blaming women. He's not blaming what she wore, how she walked, how she smiled. He's calling out the heart of men. So men, listen up. The way to avoid sexual sin is not to avoid women. It's not by refusing to meet with a female coworker, refusing to be in the same room as a person of the opposite sex. That's not purity. That's fear masquerading as wisdom. The real problem isn't out there, it's in here. And this is where you need to address. You don't solve lust by restricting women. You address lust by allowing Jesus to heal your desires. Because when we treat women like they're a threat, we're not dodging responsibility. We're again dehumanizing them over and over again. We turn them into temptations to be managed rather than image bearers to be honored. And that posture doesn't stay hidden. It will affect everything that you do, how you see your coworkers, how you see your spouse, how you see your daughters, how you see your classmates, how you see your neighbors. If you reduce women to becoming problems, you will never be able to receive them as partners in the work that God has called us to do. This is why Jesus is teaching here not just about sex, but about the dignity of women and the calling for us as men to honor them as image bearers of Jesus. Jesus is casting a vision for how men and women are meant to live together in God's kingdom, not in suspicion or imbalance, but in partnership together. Back in Genesis 1, he told that both male and female were made in the image of God, not just men. They both were made in the image of God, not just husbands and wives. Together, men and women represent the fullness of God's image. And so when a man objectifies a woman, when he reduces her to a body or a temptation or a threat, he's essentially saying only men can carry the image of God, women are optional. And friends, that's a lie, that's dangerous, and that's dignity stealing of our partners in the work that God's called us. And Jesus isn't just calling us into shame, he's calling us into a new way of seeing, where we look at one another not as problems to manage or temptations to avoid, but as partners in the mission of God. Because in the end, Jesus isn't rallying against sex. He's exposing the real problem, our distorted hearts. And his invitation to us, let him heal the way you see. Let him reshape the way you love. Let him restore the image of God in you and how you see others. So what do we do with this? How do we handle this? How do we heal from this? Dr. Jesus gives us a prescription, and he gives us two things. One, he prescribes urgent external action. Did you catch the words in our text? They're jarring, and some of you maybe even flinched. If your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out. If your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off. That's intense. Now let me be clear. Jesus is not advocating self-amputation. What Jesus is doing here is something that he often does, something that he does often. He uses deliberate, shocking hyperbole to make a point. Like the moment when he tells in the last text, hey, if you came to the altar and you remember someone, leave your animal there and go back and ask for forgiveness. He's exaggerating for impact. Because sometimes truth needs to hit us hard. And the point here is sexual sin is serious. And when it comes to temptation, half measures won't cut it. Sometimes real transformation requires real action, not symbolic change, no vague intentions, but actual decisions, practical boundaries, concrete steps. So you need to know yourself. When am I the most vulnerable? Where do I tend to slip? What patterns lead me back to the same place? You can't always control temptation, but you can stop walking straight into it. Martin Luther has this great quote. He says, You can't stop a bird from flying into your head, but you can stop it from building a nest in your head, right? In other words, temptation isn't the problem, giving it permission is. So what does urgent action look like? It might mean for you that if there are certain shows or movies or books that are pulling you off course, you choose to cut it off. That if you can't be alone in front of a computer, move it into a public space. If Instagram constantly leads you to a dark rabbit hole, delete the app. If a flirtatious relationship at work is feeding your fantasies, change the relationship. Maybe even change the job. We are habitual creatures. What we repeat, we become. And the good news, the opposite is also true. When we replace distorted habits with life-giving ones, when we take real steps with the help of the Spirit and the support of the community, we begin to experience real freedom. And one of the most powerful steps that you could take, maybe the most powerful step you could take, is to ask for help. Ask God. Ask a trusted friend. Ask your church family. Friend, it is not weak to ask for help. It is courageous. It is what healing requires. And please hear me, you are not alone. So many of us have messed up in this area. So many of us carry shame, regret, and brokenness, but there is grace. So much grace. Because the same Jesus who preached these words is the same Jesus who had prostitutes and sex workers and adulterers and would welcome them with open arms. In Jesus' community, the worse your story, the warmer your welcome. And so if you find yourself trapped, caught in a cycle of addiction or paralyzed by shame, friend, you are not beyond hope. Sexual addiction is still one of the most stigmatized and isolating struggles. People often suffer in silence, afraid to speak up out of shame, but silence will breed despair, and Jesus came to bring light when even in the darkest corners of your lives. Your worst moments don't have to define you. Remember how the Sermon on the Mount began? Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who are at the bottom. Blessed are the desperate. Blessed are those who know that they need help. During Advent, Taylor led us in a song that was called Christ is Lower Still. And I have that song on repeat for months now on my drives. Listen to these words. It says, let the King descend, the living Word made flesh. Lift this heavy heart to your throne, O God. In your wounds I find room for all of my wounds. When from grace I fell, Christ was lower still. Friends, if that's you, there is no shame. There's an invitation. If your life has been shattered by addiction, if you are stuck in things that you are ashamed of, if you have been the victim of someone else's sexual sin, hear me, Christ is lower still. No matter how far you've fallen, he has gone farther to find you. No matter how deep the shame, he goes even further with grace. If you need help, you are not alone. You don't need to struggle alone. In Loft City, we've partnered with an amazing counseling center, Watershed. We have worked with them to give you guys available resources. If you're afraid to come to one of us because you are feeling shame, we've got resources available to help you. But know that you don't have to let this define you. You don't have to walk in shame. Jesus can lead you out, not just out of sin, but out of shame into healing. So he asks us to take urgent and immediate action, but he gives us one more description, which is just as important. The second thing he tells us is to begin intentional internal formation. Remember, Jesus is saying the real issue isn't just our behavior, it's our hearts. And if that's true, then the work of sexual healing has to go deeper than filters, deeper than accountability software, deeper than behavioral boundaries. We have to go deep down to the levels of our desires. Jesus uses a fascinating word for lust there. The Greek word literally is two words, epi and thumia, which means epi means over and desire. Lust isn't just desiring the wrong thing. It could be even desiring a good thing too much, in the wrong way, in a wrong place. Lust takes something good, like sex or intimacy or beauty, and tries to extract ultimate meaning from it. It tries to get something amazing, and it always comes up short. Here's the thing. Our lust actually reveals something holy. Our lust actually reveals something holy because underneath the over-desire is a longing for something good, to be seen, to be known, to be desired, to be fully loved without fear or rejection. They are not bad feelings. They're God-given. And Jesus doesn't come to repress those desires. He comes to reorder them, to take our tangled longings and realign them, not around sex or romance or fantasy, but around his faithful, unshakable love. Because while human intimacy is a gift, even the best relationship, even the most passionate, committed, joyful marriage can't ultimately satisfy our deepest desires. Only God can do that. Only God can actually satisfy. C.S. Lewis said that God doesn't find our desires too strong. He actually says our desires are too weak. Listen to these words. He says, we're like children making mud pies in the slums because we can't imagine what it's meant to have a holiday or a vacation at the beach. So we play with mud pies instead. We settle for things like lust. We settle for fantasy. We settle for a quick fix when God is offering us infinite joy. God is offering us something so amazing. Sex points to something greater. It whispers of a deeper union, a rich communion, the kind that only God can give. Because the love that we long for, the kind that will never use us or discard us or get bored of us, that love has already come. In Jesus, God doesn't send affection. He sends us himself. He gives us his body. He gives us his life. On the cross, Jesus poured himself out faithfully, fully, and forever to prove that his love will not walk away. He will not use you. It will not forget you. We are not objects to God. We are not tools for him to use. We are his. We are his beloved. We are his sons. We are his daughters. We are his bride. He will not use you. Philip Yancey puts it this way. He says, if we receive romantic love, not as an end of itself, but as God's gift, a shining grace, it becomes like a shaft of light, beckoning us toward what we will someday experience more fully as resurrected beings. So here's my invitation to you, to see sex, love, and even our desire not as ultimate things, but as holy echoes of the greater communion that we are made for. Sex isn't the end. Jesus is. And his love is what your heart is really hungry for. Worship team, as you come up, here's the invitation. The more you walk in love with Jesus, the more you center your life on his love, the more you allow his love to name you and shape you and satisfy you, the more your desires begin to take their rightful place, not erased or ignored, but reordered. Sexual desire becomes what it's meant to be, a gift, not a god, a good fire, not a consuming one. Remember where we started? We talked about fire. It's beautiful when it stays in the fireplace. It's warm, it nourishes, it brings life. But when fire is taken out of its proper place, when it's held too close, when it's made too central, when it's worshipped instead of honored, it burns. It destroys, leaves scars. And the same is true of sex. The writer of Proverbs asks us a sobering question in Proverbs. He says, can someone carry fire next to their chest and not be burned? Can someone carry fire next to their chest and not be burned? Friends, sex is not what's sacred. Sex is not your ultimate goal. Jesus is. Jesus is offering us a better way. He's not calling us to shame, but he's calling us to freedom. He's not asking us to put out the fire. He's asking us to bring it into his hands, to let his love warm us, reshape us, and lead us into a life of self-giving love. Friends, because that is what God's kingdom is about. Not using others, but honoring others. Not self-indulgence, but offering of yourself to others. Not chasing every desire that you have, but letting your desires be healed and satisfied in Jesus. And how do we know this is possible? Because Jesus doesn't just teach us about this life, he actually lives it. He gave his own body. He offered his own life. On the cross, he didn't just warn us about sin. He took sin on himself. He bore our shame. He carried our failures. He gave his life so that you and I can be set free, made whole, and welcomed into a love that we'll never use, never discard, never walk away. And so today we come to the table to remember the one who gave everything for us. His body broken for us. His blood poured out for us. Not for perfect people, but for desperate people. For the poor in spirit. For the lustful. For the broken. For the ashamed. For the struggling. For you. For me. For us. This meal isn't a reward for the pure. It's a nourishment for the hungry. It's a fire that warms us back to life. And so this morning when we come to receive communion, let this be your prayer. Jesus, reorder my desires. Warm my heart with your love. Teach me the good life, the life of love. So let's meet the one who gave himself for us. Let's come to the table where grace is always enough. I want to invite you to examine your heart. Maybe Jesus this morning is speaking to you. You're like, I don't struggle with porn. I don't struggle with lust. I don't struggle with adultery. But maybe there's some desire in your heart that's higher than Jesus. Where is he speaking to you? Maybe for some of you in this room, you've been struggling with sexual sin, and this morning you need to acknowledge and say, God, I've made sex a God and it shouldn't be. And I need to repent. And I need to come to you for healing. We've got people in the back that are ready and available to pray with you if you need prayer. But would you spend some time with Jesus? Would you ask him to examine your heart? Would you ask him to give you eyes to see people of the other sex not as objects, but as image bearers of Jesus, to give value, dignity, and worth, to not use, to just take for yourself, but to honor the people that God has made with value and worth. Again, if you need prayer, there's folks available, but come to the table. If you're broken this morning, come to the table. If you've struggled with lust this week, come to the table. If you made a mess of your life this week, come to the table. Because there's grace here. There's forgiveness here. The way we do communion here, the worship team is going to sing, lead us in worship. I'm going to invite you to spend some time in Jesus. Examine your heart. Wherever the Lord is asking you to surrender, surrender. Whenever you're ready, come, grab the elements, and then remain standing. I'll come back up and we'll take communion together. Let's spend some time with Jesus. Let's worship him. And for someone that grew up in the honor-shame culture, I need to repent for how many times I said sex this morning. Let's worship.